The glass looks clean. That's what people don't understand. You hold it up to the kitchen window, morning light passes through, and it looks like water. It looks like the thing you trust. I filled this glass from my own tap at 6:14 this morning, same as I've done for 30 years in this house. But I have a lab report on the counter next to it, dated 11 days ago, and it says the lead content in this sample is 47 parts per billion. The EPA action level is 15. This glass is 3 times over the limit. And there's coliform bacteria in it too. Fecal coliform. In the drinking water of Lakeview, Connecticut. In my drinking water. I spent 30 years making sure this water was clean. I know what clean water looks like under a microscope, what it smells like when the chlorination is right, what the numbers are supposed to be at every stage from intake to tap. Now I know it isn't clean, and I know who did it. My name is Roy Pelletier. I'm 64 years old. I live at 14 Marsh Street in Lakeview, same house I bought in 1991 with my wife Carol. I worked at the Lakeview Water Treatment Plant for 30 years, starting at 21 as a lab technician, ending at 59 as the technical director and plant supervisor. My father worked the same plant before me. He started in 1962, back when the filters were sand and gravel and the testing was basic. He retired in 1989. I started in 1990. Between us, a Pelletier supervised the water in this town for 60 years. My father taught me one thing about water that matters more than all the chemistry. He said, "Roy, water is the only thing a city gives its people that goes inside their bodies. Everything else, the roads, the streetlights, the sewer, that's outside. Water goes in, water becomes them. You don't get to be wrong about water." I never forgot that. Every day I worked at that plant, I thought about it. Not in some noble way, just practically. The numbers have to be right. The filters have to be maintained. The testing has to be done correctly, at the right time, at the right locations, with the right protocols. There's no shortcut in water treatment that doesn't end up in someone's blood. I came to the plant after 4 years in the Army, Fort Leonard Wood, then a stint at a water purification unit in Germany. That's where I learned the technical side. The Army teaches you to make water drinkable in a field, from a river, in 12 hours. Civilian water treatment is the same science with better equipment and more regulations. I came home, applied at the plant, got hired because my father put in a word, and because I had the certifications. That was 1990. I was 28. Carol and I got married in 1992. She was a nurse at Lakeview General. We had our daughter Megan in 1995. Carol died in 2018. Breast cancer, 18 months from diagnosis to the end. I don't talk about it much. She was the one who made this house something other than a building. After she was gone, it went back to being a building. Megan lives in Portland now. She calls on Sundays. She worries about me being alone, but I'm fine with it. Some people do better alone. I'm one of them. The plant is about a mile from here, out on Route 9 near the reservoir. It's a medium-sized facility, serves about 32,000 people. We pull from Lakeview Reservoir, run through coagulation, flocculation, sedimentation, sand filtration, then chlorine disinfection. Standard process. The equipment is mostly from the 1980s with some upgrades in the 2000s. When I was running it, we had a staff of 11. 3 shifts, around the clock. Water doesn't stop, so neither does the plant. I wasn't the kind of boss people picture. I didn't sit in an office making phone calls. I was the technical director, which means I was the person who actually ran the process. I decided when to backwash the filters. I calibrated the chlorine feed. I pulled the samples and ran the tests. I trained every technician who came through. When something went wrong at 2 in the morning, a turbidity spike, a pump failure, a chemical feed malfunction, I was the one they called. For 30 years, they called me. My record was clean. Not perfect. We had incidents. Every plant does. A brief coliform detection in 2004 that turned out to be a sampling error. A turbidity exceedance in 2011 during a major storm that we corrected within 4 hours. But we never had a violation that resulted in public health risk. Never. 30 years. I'm proud of that, and I don't apologize for being proud of it. Then Janet Croy came to town. Janet Croy was hired as Lakeview's city manager in January 2022. She came from a smaller town in Massachusetts where she'd managed a municipal budget through a fiscal crisis. That was her qualification. She was a budget cutter. The town council hired her specifically to reduce spending. Lakeview had been running deficits for 3 years, and the council was tired of it. They wanted someone who'd walk in and start saying no. She was good at saying no. I first met her at a department heads meeting in February 2022. She sat at the end of the conference table with a laptop and a spreadsheet printout. She went through every department and asked the same question. What can we defer? Parks said they could defer playground resurfacing. Public Works said they could defer a bridge inspection. Fire department said they could defer a ladder truck replacement. Everyone deferred something. Then she got to me. I told her we had a $2.1 million filter modernization project that had been approved and budgeted 2 years earlier but kept getting delayed. The sand filters were original equipment from 1986. They worked, but they were past their expected life. The modernization would replace them with granular activated carbon filters, which are better at removing organic contaminants and lead precursors. I told her this was not something we could defer. I told her the filters were already 6 years past their recommended replacement date. She looked at her spreadsheet, not at me, and asked if the filters work now. I told her yes, they work now. Then they can work next year too, she said. I explained that was technically true, but operationally risky, and that every year we delayed increased the chance of a failure that would cost more than the modernization. She said, "Noted," and moved to the next department. That was my first meeting with Janet Croy. The $2.1 million filter modernization was frozen. It has never been unfrozen. That money went straight into her downtown revival project. New sidewalks and facade grants so the storefronts on Main Street would photograph well for her re-election brochure. She didn't defer the filters. She killed them and spent the money on curb appeal. Those filters are still there, 10 years past replacement, running on maintenance patches and the institutional knowledge of people who no longer work at the plant. 6 months later, in August 2022, Janet called me into her office. Not the department heads meeting, just me. She had a proposal. She said the water department budget was $1.4 million annually, and she needed to find $340,000 in savings. She had identified several areas: reducing staff from 11 to 7, extending filter maintenance intervals, reducing the frequency of discretionary water quality testing, and, here's the part that mattered, eliminating the technical director position. I told her that was my position. She was aware of that. She went on, the plant could be supervised by a licensed operator at a lower classification, someone who could handle the day-to-day without the title or the salary of a technical director. She said my pension was vested and I could take early retirement at 60% of my salary. She said the town appreciated my service. She said it like she was reading it off a card. I asked who she had in mind for the replacement. Kevin Stahl, she said. He was a Class 3 operator, 8 years of experience at a smaller plant downstate. He'd applied for a position at Lakeview the previous year, and Janet had been in contact with him. His salary would be about half of mine. I asked if Kevin had ever supervised a plant this size. He's qualified, she said. Like that settled it. I pressed. Had he ever managed a full testing program, handled state reporting, or dealt with an emergency response? Those were things he could learn on the job, she told me. I sat there for a long time. I remember the sound of the air conditioning in her office. I remember a photograph on her wall of some downtown somewhere, all renovated storefronts and new streetlights. I remember thinking, she doesn't know what water treatment is. She thinks it's a line item. I said I'd need to think about it. She said she needed an answer by Friday. There wasn't really a choice. If I said no, she'd eliminate the position anyway, and I'd be laid off with less favorable terms. The early retirement package was the better deal financially. My union rep confirmed it. He said, "Roy, take the money. You can't fight City Hall." I've always hated that expression. You can fight City Hall. It's just that City Hall has a budget for lawyers, and you don't. I signed the papers on September 2nd, 2022. My last day was September 30th. 30 years and 9 months. They threw me a farewell party at the plant. It was a Friday afternoon, 3 o'clock. Cake from the grocery store, a card signed by everyone on staff. Danny Wheeler, who'd worked under me for 22 years, gave a little speech. He got choked up, which surprised me, because Danny was about the least emotional person I'd ever met. Kevin Stahl was there. He'd already been hired, already had his badge, still shiny, the lanyard stiff and new, and was already shadowing my shifts. He shook my hand, and I noticed his fingers were restless, tapping the side of his leg even while he smiled. "Big shoes to fill," he said. I said, "Just keep the numbers right." He smiled. I don't think he understood what I meant. Janet Croy didn't come to the party. I wasn't surprised. She'd gotten what she wanted. Why would she come celebrate the things she'd done? I drove home with a box of personal items from my locker, a coffee mug, some reference books, a photograph of Carol and me at the plant's 20th anniversary in 2010. I put the box in the garage and didn't open it again for a year. The first few months of retirement, I did what you'd expect. Nothing. I fixed a few things around the house. I read. I drove to the coast once and sat on a bench and looked at the ocean. I cooked meals for one. I watched the news. I didn't watch it for anything specific, just to have voices in the house. Then, the budget meeting happened. 4 months after I retired, in January 2023, the town council had its quarterly budget review. These meetings are public. I'd never attended one as a citizen. I'd always been there as a department head, presenting the water department numbers. But I went. I don't know why. Curiosity, maybe. Or something else. The meeting room was about half full, maybe 40 people. Town council on the dais, Janet at the side table with her laptop. She went through each department. When she got to water, she said the department had achieved $340,000 in annual savings through, and I remember her exact word, modernization. She said the new team, under Kevin Stahl's leadership, had streamlined operations while maintaining all state and federal compliance standards. She thanked the new efficient water team and said Lakeview was lucky to have them. Kevin was sitting in the front row. He waved when she mentioned his name. People applauded. Not a standing ovation, just polite applause, the way people clap at a budget meeting when someone says they saved money. I was sitting in the gallery, last row. Janet didn't look at me. I don't know if she knew I was there. It doesn't matter. What matters is what she said. Maintained all state and federal compliance standards. That was the sentence. I heard it, and I knew it wasn't true. Not because I had evidence yet. I knew it the way a mechanic knows when an engine sound is off. 30 years of running a water plant. You know what $340,000 in cuts means. It means skipped tests. It means postponed filter maintenance. It means running on minimums and hoping. It means the protocols that keep the water safe are the first things to go because they're the things nobody sees. You can't cut $340,000 from an already lean operation and maintain compliance. It's arithmetic. I went home and sat at the kitchen table and thought about it for a long time. I didn't plan anything. I didn't decide to start some campaign or build a case. I just thought, I should check. That's how it started. I should check. I went to the hardware store and bought a sample collection kit. Nothing fancy. Sterile bottles, gloves, a cooler. I knew the protocol because I'd written it. I went to my kitchen tap. I let the water sit in the pipes overnight. That's how you test for lead. You want first draw water, the water that's been sitting in contact with the plumbing for at least 6 hours. At 6 in the morning, I opened the tap and filled the bottle. Sealed it. Labeled it. Date, time, location, water temperature. I drove it to Aquatest Labs in Hartford, 40 minutes away. They're an independent lab, state certified, no connection to Lakeview. I paid $87 for a full metals panel and bacteriological analysis. The woman at the counter asked if I was a homeowner checking my well. I said yes, because it was easier than explaining. Results came back in 10 days. Lead, 22 parts per billion. EPA action level is 15. Coliform bacteria, present. Not a massive exceedance, not an emergency, but not clean, not within standards. And this was just one sample from one tap. I didn't call City Hall. I didn't call the state. I didn't call anyone. I took a second sample from my kitchen tap 2 weeks later. Lead, 19 parts per billion. Coliform, not detected this time. Then a third sample from the bathroom tap. Lead, 24 parts per billion. Then a fourth from the garden hose bib, which draws from a different line. Lead, 31 parts per billion. 4 samples, all above the EPA action level, all from my own house. One house, on one street, in one town that was supposedly in full compliance. I sat with those results for a week. I could have taken them somewhere, to the state, to the EPA, to a lawyer. 4 samples from one house don't prove a systemic problem. Any engineer would tell you that. One house might have old lead solder in the plumbing. One house might be an anomaly. To prove something, you need data, not 4 data points. Dozens, hundreds, over time, from multiple locations. Consistent, documented, reproducible data that can't be dismissed as a retiree's grudge. So that's what I decided to build. I spent 2 weeks designing a sampling protocol. The Army had taught me how to set up a testing grid in the field, how to pick collection points that capture the full picture of a water source, not just the easy spots. I used that same logic now. I chose 22 test points across Lakeview. I picked them based on 30 years of knowledge about the distribution system, where the oldest pipes are, where the pressure zones change, where the water sits longest before someone turns on a tap. I included the obvious locations: 3 elementary schools, the middle school, the hospital, the senior center, town hall. I included the less obvious ones: fire hydrants at the edge of the system where water quality tends to be worst, residential taps in the neighborhood near the old pump substation where the infrastructure was oldest, the park drinking fountain. Every month, I'd do a full cycle, 22 samples collected on a schedule with proper first draw protocols at residential taps and grab samples at hydrants. Each bottle was numbered and labeled: date, time, GPS coordinates, water temperature, residual chlorine measured with a pocket colorimeter. I bought an industrial-grade refrigerator for the garage to store samples before transport. That corner of the garage smelled like cold concrete and the faint mineral tang of sealed water bottles. Not unpleasant, just clinical. Like a lab that happened to share space with a lawnmower. I recorded everything in a spreadsheet with 14 columns. The cost was about $400 a month in lab fees. Independent testing isn't cheap when you're paying retail. Over 4 years, that came to $19,200 out of my pension. $400 a month is roughly a quarter of my pension after taxes. I stopped eating out. I canceled the cable. I let the newspaper subscription lapse, which is ironic given how this story ends. I drove the samples to Hartford every month in a cooler in the back seat of my truck. Megan called on Sundays, and I'd tell her things were fine. She asked what I was doing with my time, and I said I'd taken up a hobby. She sounded relieved. She'd been worried about me sitting in the house doing nothing. "That's great, Dad," she said. "What kind of hobby?" I said science. She laughed. "You've been doing science your whole life." That was true. I just wasn't getting paid for it anymore. The neighbors thought I was eccentric. The old guy with the bottles and the cooler, driving to Hartford every month. Bill Thorson next door asked me once what I was doing, and I said I was testing the water. He said, "The water's fine, Roy." I said, "Probably." He went back to mowing his lawn. I went back to my bottles. The first 6 months of data confirmed what 4 samples had suggested. Lead levels across the 22 test points ranged from 11 to 47 parts per billion. 14 of the 22 points exceeded the EPA action level of 15 parts per billion. The worst readings were concentrated in 3 areas: the neighborhood near the old pump substation, the block around Roosevelt Elementary School, and the houses along the southern feeder main were the pipes dated to the 1960s. Coliform bacteria showed up sporadically, present in about 1 out of every 5 samples, which indicates the chlorine residual isn't being maintained at the far reaches of the system. That's a disinfection problem. It means someone isn't monitoring chlorine levels properly, or the chlorine feed rate isn't high enough, or both. Copper was elevated at a few points too, though not above the action level. Trihalomethanes, the disinfection byproducts you get when chlorine reacts with organic matter, were above the maximum contaminant level at 2 points in the summer months, which tells me the filters aren't removing enough organic material before chlorination. That's exactly what the granular activated carbon filters were supposed to fix, the ones Janet froze. But lead was the headline. Lead was the thing that would get attention. Lead in drinking water goes into your blood, into your bones, into your brain. In adults, it causes kidney damage, high blood pressure, reproductive problems. In children, it causes developmental delay, learning disabilities, behavioral issues. There is no safe level of lead exposure for children. The EPA action level of 15 parts per billion isn't a safety threshold, it's a regulatory trigger. Below 15, you don't have to act. Above 15, you do. But any lead is bad lead, especially for kids. And the kids in Lakeview were drinking this water. At school, from the fountain. At home, from the tap. In their formula, in their juice, in the pasta water. Every day. 6 months of data wasn't enough. I needed more. I needed to show a pattern, not a snapshot. I needed seasonal variation, summer levels versus winter levels, because water chemistry changes with temperature. I needed to show consistency, that these weren't random spikes, but a sustained, ongoing contamination. And I needed to compare my data with the official reports. That's where the FOIA requests came in. Under Connecticut's Freedom of Information Act, I could request the monthly water quality reports that the Lakeview Water Department submits to the State Department of Public Health. These reports include the lead and copper testing results, the coliform testing results, the disinfection byproduct data, and the chlorine residual measurements. Every public water system has to submit them. I used to prepare them myself. I filed my first request in March 2023. I asked for all monthly reports from October 2022 through February 2023, the first 5 months under Kevin's supervision. The town's FOIA officer acknowledged receipt and said the documents would be available in 30 days. They took 3 months. When I finally got them, some sections were redacted. Not the numbers themselves, but the internal memos and notes that normally accompany the reports. I filed a follow-up request for the unredacted versions. That took another 2 months. By the time I had the full picture of what Kevin was reporting to the state, it was August 2023, almost a year into my testing. The comparison was damning. Kevin's reports showed lead levels at the compliance monitoring points ranging from 8 to 12 parts per billion, all below the 15 parts per billion action level, all in compliance. Coliform testing, all negative. Chlorine residuals, within range. Disinfection byproducts, within limits. On paper, the Lakeview water system was performing beautifully. Better than when I'd run it, in fact. My independent data from the same time period showed lead levels at corresponding locations of 20 to 35 parts per billion, 14 of 22 points above the action level. Coliform detections in 20% of samples. Chlorine residuals below the minimum at the far points of the system. The numbers didn't match, not even close. Kevin was showing lead at 8 to 12. I was showing 20 to 35. At some points, the discrepancy was 2 to 1. At others, nearly 5 to 1. Across 14 of 22 test locations, the official numbers were half or less of what an independent lab was finding. There are only a few explanations for that kind of discrepancy. The labs could be wrong, but Aquatest is state certified, and I was using proper collection protocols. My locations could be different, but I was testing at points that matched or overlapped with the compliance monitoring locations. Or the official samples were being collected in a way that produced artificially low results. I knew what the answer was. I'd been in this business for 30 years. I knew how you can game the numbers without technically falsifying a report. You flush the tap before you collect. You let the water run for 2, 3, 5 minutes before you fill the bottle, which purges the lead that accumulated in the pipes and gives you a reading that's lower, sometimes dramatically lower, than what a resident actually drinks. You collect at the time of day when water use is highest and the water's been moving, rather than first thing in the morning when it's been sitting in lead-soldered joints all night. You pick your monitoring points at newer buildings with copper or PEX plumbing, rather than at the old houses where the problem is worst. None of that is outright fabrication. It's selection bias. It's choosing the conditions that give you the answer you need. In the water industry, it's known and it's understood, and it's the thing that separates a good plant operator from a compliant one. A good operator tests under worst-case conditions because that's what matters. A compliant operator tests under best-case conditions because that's what passes. Kevin was a compliant operator. I don't think Kevin is a bad person. I need to say that because this story is going to sound like Kevin is the villain, and he's not. Kevin is a 38-year-old guy who took a job he wasn't fully qualified for because the pay was decent and the town seemed nice. He'd run a small plant, 6,000 customers, simple treatment, newer infrastructure. Lakeview is 32,000 customers, 1980s equipment, a distribution system with pipes dating to the Eisenhower administration. The jump in complexity is enormous. It's like going from driving a sedan to piloting a cargo ship. I drove past the plant sometimes, not to spy. The route to the grocery store goes right by it. But I noticed things. I'd see Kevin outside, smoking, which I'd never allowed at the plant because of chemical storage nearby. I'd see him on his phone, pacing, looking agitated. Once, I drove by at 9 at night, and his car was the only one in the lot, which meant he was there alone because they'd cut the overnight shift. You can't properly monitor a treatment process without overnight staff. Things happen at 3 in the morning. Turbidity spikes, chemical feed malfunctions, pressure changes. If nobody's there, nobody catches it. I think Kevin knew the numbers didn't add up. I think he tested the way he'd been shown at his old plant, simpler protocols, fewer safeguards, and got numbers that were close enough to the range he needed. And when they weren't, I think he adjusted his collection methods until they were. Not because he's dishonest, but because Janet Croy told him what she needed, and he didn't have the experience or the spine to push back. I can imagine the conversation. Janet sitting across from Kevin, the way she sat across from me. Kevin, I need the numbers in range. That's your job. The town can't afford a lead problem right now. The downtown revival project depends on public confidence. I need numbers in range. And Kevin nodded. Because what else do you do when your boss tells you that? If you're young and your career is ahead of you, and you don't have 30 years of knowing that the numbers are the numbers, you nod. You find a way to make the numbers work. You tell yourself, it's fine. The water's probably fine. The old guy was probably over-testing. The margins are built in for a reason. Kevin chose his career. I understand that choice. I don't respect it, but I understand it. 3 years passed. 2023, 2024, 2025. 36 months of testing. 22 points, every month. I kept every bottle until the lab results came back. I kept every lab report in a filing cabinet in the garage, organized by date and location. I kept the spreadsheet backed up on a flash drive and a printout. 792 samples in 3 years, not counting the first months when I was only testing my own house. The total by the end would be 818, but the core systematic dataset was those 792. During those 3 years, the water quality didn't improve. It got worse. Lead levels crept up as the old pipes corroded further, and the anti-corrosion treatment, which requires precise chemical dosing that I seriously doubt Kevin was maintaining, became less effective. The seasonal pattern was clear. Higher lead in summer when water temperature increases corrosion rates, slightly lower in winter. But even the lowest winter readings were above the action level at most points. During those 3 years, the official reports continued to show compliance. Kevin's numbers stayed in the 8 to 14 parts per billion range. Never above 15. Never a violation. Never a public notification. The state accepted the reports and filed them. Nobody checked. During those 3 years, Janet Croy's downtown revival project moved forward. The city spent $3.8 million on it. New streetlights, new sidewalks, facade grants for the storefronts on Main Street, a new fountain in the town square, a pocket park with benches and a walking path. It was beautiful. I walked through it once. The fountain was nice, recirculating water arcing over polished granite, clear and sparkling in the afternoon sun. Decorative water, the kind of water you spend money making look pretty while the water people actually drink turns to poison 2 miles away. The brass plaque said, "Downtown Revival, a community investment," with Janet's name underneath as city manager. She got re-elected in November 2024 on the strength of it. The Lakeview Gazette ran a profile. Croy delivers on downtown promise. Photo of her cutting a ribbon. Nobody asked where the money came from. Nobody asked what didn't get funded so the fountain could. I could have gone to the authorities earlier. I think about that. I had enough data after the first year to raise an alarm. After 18 months, the pattern was undeniable. Why did I wait? 3 reasons, and I'll be honest about all of them. First, I knew they'd call me a bitter retiree. That's the obvious narrative. Old guy gets pushed out, decides to make trouble. I could hear Janet's response before I even filed a complaint. Mr. Pelletier has never accepted his retirement. This is personal, not scientific. And she wouldn't be entirely wrong. It was personal. Not in the way she'd mean it, not as revenge, but in the sense that I personally cared about this water and this town in a way she never did. But that distinction doesn't play well in a headline or a council meeting. Second, I wanted an unassailable data set. Not a year of data that could be dismissed as a snapshot. Not 18 months that could be explained by seasonal variation. I wanted years. I wanted so many data points that no reasonable person could look at them and conclude anything other than what they showed. I wanted the data to be the argument, not me. Because I'm a 64-year-old retiree and the data is science, and science doesn't have a grudge. Third, and this is the one I'm least proud of, I kept hoping Kevin would self-correct. Every month, I half expected to see the numbers in the official reports start to climb toward reality. I thought maybe Kevin would get better at his job, or get scared, or get a conscience. I thought maybe someone at the state would notice something off and ask questions. I thought maybe the system would work the way it's supposed to. It didn't. The system is designed to trust the numbers it receives. If the numbers say the water is fine, the system says the water is fine. The system doesn't knock on your door and check. So I waited. Month after month, sample after sample. My garage became a lab. My kitchen table became a desk. My retirement became a second job that paid nothing and cost me $400 a month, and the certainty that my neighbors thought I'd lost my mind. Then the children got sick. In the fall of 2025, a pediatrician named Dr. Amanda Chen at Lakeview Pediatrics noticed something. Over the preceding 8 months, she had seen 7 children with elevated blood lead levels. Not astronomical levels, not the kind you see in acute poisoning, but levels of 5 to 12 micrograms per deciliter, which is above the CDC reference value of 3.5 and well into the range where developmental effects begin. 7 children in 8 months, all between the ages of 1 and 6, all from the same neighborhood. The neighborhood near the old pump substation, the area with the oldest pipes, the zone where my testing showed the highest lead levels, consistently 30 to 47 parts per billion, 3 to 4 times the EPA action level. Dr. Chen reported it to the Lakeview Litchfield Health District, as she was required to do. The health district investigated, which mostly meant asking the parents if they lived in old houses with lead paint. Some did. Lead paint is a common source of childhood lead exposure, and it's the first thing the health department checks. But 2 of the 7 families lived in houses built after 1978, when lead paint was banned. And 1 family had already had their house tested. No lead paint found. The lead was coming from somewhere else. The health district contacted the water department and asked if there were any water quality concerns in that area. Kevin said no. I don't know the exact conversation, but the health district's follow-up report, which I obtained later through FOIA, includes a note. Water Department reports all compliance monitoring within EPA action levels. No current concerns regarding lead in water supply. That was November 2025. 7 children with elevated blood lead. A pattern concentrated in one neighborhood. And the official response was, no concerns. The Lakeview Gazette ran a small article in December. Pediatrician raises concern over lead cluster. It was about 200 words, on page 6, below a story about the high school basketball team. The reporter was Sarah Munoz, the paper's only full-time journalist. She wrote it straight. A pediatrician had identified a cluster of elevated blood lead levels in children. The health district was investigating. The water department reported no concerns. No alarmism, no speculation, just the facts as they were available to her. I read that article at the kitchen table. I read it 3 times. Then I went to the garage and pulled the filing cabinet open and found the test results for the substation neighborhood. I cross-referenced the addresses of the 7 children. They were in the article, or rather, the blocks were named, with my 22 test points. I laid the map on the table and put my finger on each address, one by one. Ash Street, Cedar Lane, the duplex on Oak. Each finger landed on red, every single one. Every single one was in the zone of maximum contamination. I'd been looking at those red dots for 3 years as data points. Now each dot had a child's name attached to it. Points 8, 9, 11, and 14 on my grid. Lead levels over the 3 years ranging from 28 to 47 parts per billion, with an average of 36. More than double the EPA action level. Consistently, every month, for 3 years. Those children had been drinking this water their entire lives, since birth. In their formula, in their bottles, in the ice cubes, in the pasta water, in the soup. Every day, lead was going into their bodies, accumulating in their blood, settling into their bones, reaching their developing brains. And every month, a report went to the state of Connecticut saying the water was fine. I couldn't wait anymore. I sat at the kitchen table that night for a long time. I looked at the spreadsheet. I looked at the lab reports. I looked at the article. I thought about what would happen when I came forward. I thought about the response. I thought about Janet's defense, and Kevin's defense, and the town's response, and the neighbors. I thought about the fact that once this was out, Lakeview would be the town with the lead problem, and property values would drop, and people would be angry, and some of them would be angry at me. I thought about 7 children. I called Megan. It was a Wednesday night, not our usual Sunday. She picked up on the second ring. "Dad? Everything okay?" I said, "Everything's fine. I just wanted to tell you I'm about to do something. The neighbors won't like it." There was a pause. Then she said, "This is about the water." I hadn't told her the details. I'd said it was a hobby. But she's not stupid. She's Carol's daughter. She sees through things. I said, "Yes." She said, "How bad is it?" I said, "Bad enough that kids are getting sick." She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Do what you have to do, Dad." I said I would. She said, "Be careful." I said I'd be fine. I spent the next week assembling the package. Not assembling. I'd been assembling it for 4 years. Organizing it. Making it presentable. Making it undeniable. The core was the lab reports. All of them. At that point, I had 193 samples with full independent lab analysis. Each report included the date, time, and GPS coordinates of collection, the water temperature, the residual chlorine level, and the full analytical results for lead, copper, coliform, and disinfection byproducts, all from Aquatest Labs, all with their state certification number on the letterhead. Next was the comparison table. I'd been building this for over a year since I got the FOIA documents. It was a side-by-side spreadsheet. Column A was the date, Column B was the test point. Column C was my independent result. Column D was the corresponding official result from Kevin's reports. Where the locations didn't match exactly, I noted the nearest corresponding point. The pattern was impossible to miss. Two parallel sets of numbers for the same water system, and they didn't agree. Not once. Not at any point. Not in any month. Then there was the map. I'd marked all 22 test points on a satellite image of Lakeview, color-coded by severity. Green for below the action level, yellow for 1 to 2 times over, red for more than 2 times over. Most of the map was yellow and red. Then, I overlaid the addresses of the 7 children with elevated blood lead. They clustered in the red zone like a bullseye. I printed everything, 347 pages. I organized it into 3 identical binders. I labeled each one with a table of contents and a 1-page executive summary. I addressed them to 3 recipients. The first binder went to the Connecticut Department of Public Health, Environmental Health Section. I sent it by certified mail, return receipt requested. I included a cover letter identifying myself, my qualifications, my 30 years at the Lakeview plant, and a summary of my findings. I stated that I believed the town's water quality reports had been inaccurate for at least 3 years, and that the actual lead levels posed an imminent public health risk, particularly to children in the substation neighborhood. The second binder went to the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, Region 1 in Boston. Same cover letter, same materials. I sent it both electronically. I scanned the entire binder and emailed it to the Region 1 Drinking Water Enforcement Office, and by certified mail. The third binder went to Sarah Munoz at the Lakeview Gazette. I could have just sent the first 2 and let the government handle it. That's the proper channel. File a complaint, let the regulators investigate, wait for the process to work. But I'd been waiting for the process to work for 4 years. The state had been accepting Kevin's reports without question for 4 years. The regulatory system had failed. I didn't trust it to suddenly succeed just because I filed a complaint. Sarah Munoz was 28 years old. She was the sole staff reporter at a newspaper that was dying, down from 12 reporters in 2010 to 1 reporter and a part-time editor. She covered everything: town council, school board, police blotter, high school sports, local business features. She had a journalism degree from UConn and a talent for plain writing. She'd published the lead cluster article. She'd noticed. I walked into the Gazette office on a Tuesday morning. It was a small storefront on Main Street, in the downtown revival zone actually. New facade, new streetlight out front. Janet's project. I was carrying a box. Sarah was at the only occupied desk. The editor's office was dark. She looked up when I came in. "I'm Roy Pelletier," I said. "I have data for your lead story." She looked at the box, then at me. "What kind of data?" I set the box on her desk and opened it. I showed her the binder, the lab reports, the comparison table, the map. "This is 4 years of independent water quality testing," I said. 22 points across Lakeview, 193 samples, all analyzed by a state-certified independent lab. The lead levels are 2 to 5 times the EPA action level at 14 of 22 locations. She started flipping through the binder. She looked at the numbers. She looked at the map. She looked at the red dots and the cluster of children's addresses. Somewhere around the 3rd page of lab reports, she stopped flipping and just stared at the comparison table. Her jaw tightened. She didn't say anything for about 30 seconds. When she looked up, her expression had changed. The professional curiosity was gone, replaced by something harder. "This is 4 years?" she said. "Every month," I said. 22 points, independent lab. She looked at me. "You did this yourself?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because I used to run that plant, and I know what these numbers are supposed to look like." She asked me to sit down. We talked for 3 hours. She asked every question a journalist should ask. How did I collect the samples? Where were the test points? How did I select them? What was my relationship with the water department? Why did I leave? Had I filed any complaints? Did I have a grievance pending? Did I have a financial interest? Did anyone help me? I answered everything. I didn't hide the fact that I'd been pushed out. I didn't hide the fact that I had reason to be angry. I said, "You can decide if my reasons make the data invalid, but the lab doesn't know who I am or why I'm testing. The numbers are the numbers." She said she needed time to review the materials and make some calls. She said she'd be in touch. 1 week later, on a Saturday, the Lakeview Gazette published a front-page story. The headline was, "4 years of tests show Lakeview Water failing federal lead standards." Beneath it, in smaller type, "Retired plant supervisor's independent data contradicts official reports." Sarah's byline. A map, my map, redrawn by the paper's designer. A chart showing my numbers versus the official numbers. A quote from me. A quote from Dr. Chen confirming the blood lead cluster. A no comment from the city manager's office. A no comment from Kevin Stahl. The article was thorough, fair, and devastating. Sarah had done what good journalists do. She took the data, verified what she could, identified what she couldn't, and presented it clearly. She noted my qualifications and my departure from the water department. She noted the financial conflict, that I might have reason to discredit the department that replaced me. But she also noted that the data came from a state-certified lab, that my collection protocols followed EPA guidelines, and that the pattern was consistent across 4 years and nearly 200 samples. She let the numbers speak. The numbers were loud. What happened next happened fast. Monday morning, the Connecticut Department of Public Health issued an emergency advisory. Not a boil water order yet. They didn't have their own confirmation, but an advisory recommending that residents in the substation neighborhood use bottled water for drinking and cooking pending further testing. They announced they would conduct independent sampling within 48 hours. Monday afternoon, the EPA Region 1 office in Boston confirmed they had received my complaint and were coordinating with the state on an investigation. Monday evening, Janet Croy called an emergency town council meeting. I watched the live stream on the Gazette's website. Janet sat at the center of the dais, flanked by the town attorney and the public works director. The room was packed. People were angry, but they weren't sure who to be angry at yet. Janet's defense was exactly what I'd predicted. She said, "The town has received a complaint based on unofficial data collected by a former employee with a well-known grievance against the current administration. Mr. Pelletier was offered a generous early retirement package and has never accepted the terms of his departure. His so-called testing does not follow approved compliance protocols and has not been conducted under any regulatory authority. The town's official water quality reports, prepared by our licensed water system operator, show full compliance with all state and federal standards." She said it smoothly. She'd rehearsed it. The town attorney nodded along. Someone in the audience, I couldn't see who, said, "So is the water safe or not?" Janet said, "Our reports say it is." The person said, "But the state just told us to use bottled water." Janet said, "The state is responding to an unverified complaint. We expect the state's testing to confirm what our reports have shown." That was Monday night. Wednesday morning, the state completed its emergency sampling. They tested at 15 locations across Lakeview, including 6 that overlapped with my test points and 3 in the substation neighborhood. Wednesday evening, the results were released. Lead levels ranged from 18 to 52 parts per billion. 13 of 15 locations exceeded the EPA action level. The substation neighborhood readings averaged 41 parts per billion, nearly 3 times the action level. Coliform bacteria detected at 4 locations. Chlorine residuals below the minimum at 7 locations. The state's numbers matched mine. Not exactly. Different day, different conditions, slightly different locations. But the pattern was identical. The magnitude was identical. The conclusion was identical. The water in Lakeview was contaminated, had been contaminated, and the official reports saying otherwise were wrong. Thursday morning, the state issued a full boil water advisory for the entire Lakeview water system, not just the substation neighborhood, the whole town. 32,000 people were told not to drink the water from their taps until further notice. Thursday afternoon, Kevin Stahl resigned. He didn't hold a press conference. He didn't issue a statement. He walked out of the plant with a cardboard box, I imagine it looked a lot like mine, and got in his car. Sarah Munoz caught him in the parking lot. She asked him for a comment. He said, "I was told the numbers were fine." That's all he said. 6 words. I've thought about those 6 words many times. They're not a defense. They're not an excuse. They're a confession, not of what he did, but of how he let it happen. Someone told him the numbers were fine, and he believed them, or he chose to believe them, or he decided it was easier to believe them than to question them. And 7 children got lead in their blood. I don't know what Kevin does now. I heard he moved downstate. I heard he's not in water treatment anymore. I don't wish him harm. I wish he'd been stronger. But I was 60 when Janet pushed me out, and I had 30 years of backbone built up. Kevin was 34 when she hired him, and he had nothing but a license and a paycheck to protect. I don't excuse it, but I understand it. Friday morning, the governor's office announced that the Lakeview water system would be placed under state receivership. A state-appointed emergency manager would oversee operations until the system was brought into compliance. The downtown revival project was frozen pending a review of municipal spending priorities. A federal infrastructure grant that Janet had applied for was paused pending the EPA investigation. Friday afternoon, the town council held an emergency session and voted 4-1 to place Janet Croy on administrative leave. The one dissenting vote was Carl Dietrich, who was Janet's appointment to the council. Janet did not attend the meeting. Her attorney issued a statement saying she had always acted in the best interest of the community and that she looked forward to a full and fair review of the facts. I didn't attend any of these meetings. I didn't give any more interviews after the initial story. Sarah Munoz called twice, and I said I'd said everything I had to say, and the data was public now. I stayed home. On Saturday, I stepped out front to get the newspaper. I'd resubscribed, and my neighbor across the street, Ed Wilkins, was standing in his driveway. Ed's lived there as long as I have. We've never been friends exactly, but we've been neighbors for 30 years. We wave, we nod, we talk about the weather. Ed looked at me across the street and said, "You know what my house is worth now? $40,000 less. Thanks, Roy." He didn't yell it. He said it in a normal voice, like he was telling me the time. I said, "Ed, you were drinking that water too." He stared at me for a second. Then he said, "I was drinking it fine until you opened your mouth." He turned around and went inside. Screen door banged shut behind him. I stood there with the newspaper in my hand. I didn't say anything else because there was nothing else to say. He wasn't wrong. His house was worth less. Every house in Lakeview was worth less. The town with the lead problem. That's what the real estate listing would say. That's what the Google search would show. That's what buyers would find. 5 years from now, 10 years from now, people would still say, "Lakeview, wasn't that the place with the water?" Ed Wilkins had lived in that house for 30 years, same as me. He'd raised his kids there. He'd paid his mortgage and his taxes and kept his lawn mowed. And now his house was worth $40,000 less because I'd told the truth about the water he was drinking. Was I supposed to not tell the truth? Was Ed supposed to keep drinking lead and not know about it? Were those 7 kids supposed to keep getting poisoned so Ed's property value held? I don't ask those questions to be righteous. I ask them because I've been asking them of myself for months, and the answers don't make me feel better. I'm right, and Ed's house is worth less, and both of those things are true at the same time. Being right about lead doesn't fix Ed's retirement plan. Telling the truth about the water doesn't make the neighbor across the street look at you the same way. Nobody thanks you for finding the problem. They thank you for fixing it, maybe, years later, when the fixing is done and they've forgotten why it needed fixing. But the person who says, "The water isn't clean," that person broke something. Even though the thing was already broken, even though they just said it out loud. In a town, the person who names the damage gets blamed for the damage. That's how it works. I've had other conversations like Ed's. Not many, but enough. At the grocery store, a woman I didn't recognize said, "I hope you're happy," and walked away. At the gas station, a man told me I should have handled it privately instead of going to the press. At the post office, the clerk, who I've known for 20 years, wouldn't make eye contact. These are scared people. Their homes are their biggest asset. Their town is their identity. And some guy with a box of lab reports just told the world that both are tainted. I understand the anger. I don't accept the blame. But there are other conversations too. Quieter ones. A week after the story broke, my phone rang. It was a woman named Maria Gonzalez. She lived on Ash Street, in the substation neighborhood. Her daughter, Sofia, was 4 years old. Sofia was one of the 7 children with elevated blood lead. Maria said, "Mr. Pelletier, I wanted to thank you." I said she didn't need to thank me. She said, "I spent 6 months thinking it was my fault. The health district told me to check for lead paint. I checked. There was no lead paint. I thought it was the toys. I threw away all her toys. I thought it was the dirt in the yard. I dug up the yard and put new soil in. I didn't know it was the water. Nobody told me it was the water." She was crying. Not dramatically, quietly, the way people cry when they're exhausted. I said, "I'm sorry it took so long." She said, "You were the only one looking." That call is the one that stays with me. Not the meetings, not the headlines, not the investigations. Maria Gonzalez, throwing away her daughter's toys, digging up her yard, blaming herself. Because nobody told her the water was the problem. Because the person whose job it was to know, Kevin, was reporting numbers that said the water was fine. Because the person whose job it was to oversee him, Janet, needed the numbers to be fine. 3 other families called, all from the substation neighborhood. All quiet calls, not public statements. They thanked me. One father asked if I could recommend a doctor who specialized in childhood lead exposure. I gave him the name of a toxicologist at Yale. Another mother asked if there would be a lawsuit. I said I didn't know. She said she couldn't afford a lawyer. I said if there was a class action, it wouldn't cost her anything up front. I don't know if that's true. I'm not a lawyer. But I said it because she needed to hear something. These families don't post on social media about Roy Pelletier, the hero who saved the town. That's not how this works. Their children have lead in their blood, and the long-term effects won't be known for years. Is Sofia going to struggle in school? Is she going to have behavioral problems? Is the lead going to affect her IQ? Nobody knows. The damage is done, and the damage is invisible, and the damage will unfold over years. These families are living with that. A thank you call to the old man who tested the water doesn't fix it. It's just manners. It's just decency. I'm telling this story because someone asked me to, and because the facts should be on record from where I stood. I want to be clear about what this is and what it isn't. This isn't a story about a hero. I didn't save Lakeview. I documented a problem and sent the documentation to people who could do something about it. Any competent water engineer could have done the same thing. The fact that I was the one who did it says more about the system than it does about me. Where was the state during those 4 years? Where were the regulators? Where was the mandatory reporting oversight? Where was the system that was supposed to catch this without needing a retired old man with a cooler full of bottles? This isn't a revenge story either. I was angry when Janet pushed me out, and I'm still angry. But the anger isn't what drove the testing. What drove the testing was the numbers. From that first sample, 22 parts per billion, my own kitchen tap, I knew something was wrong, and I couldn't unknow it. Once you know the water is bad, you can't pretend it isn't. Not if you spent 30 years making it clean. It goes against everything in you. And this isn't a story with a clean ending. The state emergency manager has been running the plant for 2 months now. They've increased the chlorine feed rate and the corrosion control treatment. They've brought in temporary staff. They've begun emergency pipe replacement in the substation neighborhood. $6.2 million, which is 3 times what the filter modernization would have cost. The boil water advisory was lifted in March, But the state is still running weekly testing, and the results are improving. Lead levels are coming down, slowly. The old pipes are still there. The filters are still from 1986. The full remediation will take years and cost tens of millions. And the town doesn't have tens of millions because Janet spent $3.8 million on a fountain and streetlights. The EPA investigation is ongoing. The State Attorney General's office has opened a separate investigation into whether the official water quality reports constituted fraud. I've been interviewed twice by investigators. I gave them everything, all 193 sample results, all FOIA documents, the comparison tables, the maps. They asked me the same questions Sarah asked. Why did I start testing? Why did I wait 4 years? Was this personal? I gave them the same answers, the same truth. Yes, it was personal. Yes, I waited. Yes, the data is real. Janet Croy was terminated by the town council in February. She has retained a lawyer and issued a statement saying she made difficult fiscal decisions in good faith and that she relied on the reports of her licensed water system operator. In other words, she blames Kevin. Kevin, who already said he was told the numbers were fine. In other words, he blames her. They'll circle each other in depositions for years. Nobody will say, I did this. They'll both say, I was doing my job. And in a way, they're both telling the truth. Janet's job, as she understood it, was to cut the budget. Kevin's job, as he understood it, was to give her numbers that worked. The system incentivized exactly what happened. Cut costs, show compliance, look efficient. Nobody's job was to make sure the water was actually clean. That used to be my job. They eliminated it. I sit at my kitchen table now, the same table where I looked at that first lab report 4 years ago. I fill a glass from the tap. The water is clearer now. The corrosion control treatment is working. The state is testing weekly, and the numbers are coming down. I drink it. I hold it up to the light. It looks like water. There's a stack of mail on the table. 2 letters from lawyers asking me to participate in a class action lawsuit as an expert witness. A letter from the state health department thanking me for my civic contribution. A letter from a documentary producer in New York wanting to tell the Lakeview Water story. I haven't responded to any of them. There's also a card, small, handwritten. It came 2 weeks ago with no return address, just a Lakeview postmark. Inside, in a child's unsteady handwriting, it says, "Thank you for the water," signed Sofia G, with a drawing of a glass. I keep it on the refrigerator. I didn't do anything extraordinary. I collected water in bottles and paid a lab to test it. I wrote down the numbers. I compared them to the numbers that were supposed to be right. When they didn't match, I told people. That's it. That's the whole story. A man who knows about water noticed the water was wrong and said so. The part that should bother you isn't what I did. It's that I had to do it at all. That a public water system serving 32,000 people could be failing for 4 years, and the only person checking was a retiree spending a quarter of his pension on lab fees. That the state accepted the official reports without verification. That a city manager could redirect $2.1 million from water infrastructure to a downtown beautification project, and nobody asked what that would mean for the water. That a replacement supervisor could submit false reports for 4 years, and nobody noticed. The system is designed to trust itself. The operators report to the state. The state trusts the operators. The public trusts the state. And if the operators lie, even if they lie by omission, by technique, by selection bias, the system doesn't catch it. There's no independent check. There's no verification. There's just trust. And trust is not a water quality parameter. You can't measure trust. You can't test for trust. You can either trust the system or you can test the water. I tested the water. I'm 64 years old. My wife is gone. My daughter is in Portland. My neighbors think I ruined the town. The regulators are investigating a mess that shouldn't have happened. The children in the substation neighborhood have lead in their blood that won't come out. And the water is getting clean again. Slowly, expensively, the way it was supposed to be all along. I'll keep testing. Not because I don't trust the state emergency manager, she seems competent. Not because I think the system will fail again, though it might. I'll keep testing because that's what I do. I'm a waterman. I've always been a waterman. My father was a waterman. We made sure the water was clean, and when someone else made it dirty, I proved it. Tomorrow morning, I'll wake up at 6. I'll go to the kitchen. I'll fill a glass from the tap, feel the cold of it against my palm, hear the faucet rattle the way it always does in this old house. I'll hold it up to the light, and I'll drink it.